For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. All right, looks like we are live, and it's live with Standing for Truth and Raw Matt, guys. This is exciting. Good to see everybody in the chat. Brother Matt, good to see you. How you doing this afternoon?
Doing good, man. Doing good. It's going to be fun.
Awesome. This is going to be exciting, guys. So what I want to say is Raw Matt and I are going to be doing more of these. Okay, live with SFT and Raw Matt. We're going to pick different topics every time. We're going to try and do it around kind of the same time, you know, a little bit earlier in the afternoon, and keep it around an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending on the topic. But it's going to be a lot of fun. Anybody who has any specific ideas, or maybe they've heard some arguments or seen some videos or something they'd like us to address in the future, then please email me that or let us know, because we're looking forward to this. So today we're going to be discussing Neanderthals. Now, before we get into it, though, a couple announcements, because March is already a really, really busy month. I didn't think that we could top the first 2 months of 2021, but we've got a ton of shows. We've already had a ton of shows, actually. But to remind you, tomorrow we've got John McKay back with us, and Dr. Diane Eager. They're going to be here at 6 o'clock EST, okay? And we are going to be discussing the Great Flood, fossils, and evidence. And we're going to be doing a Q&A, audience Q&A. So that's exciting. And then next week on the 11th, we've got a debate on Hyperionism versus Christianity. Fighting Back will be here, which is exciting. He'll be debating Boy. So this will be Boy's third time here. On the 18th, we've got Bill Morgan back with us debating T-Jump, which is sure to be epic, on creation versus evolution, as well as at the end of the month, what a way to end the month, Professor McQueen versus Jordan on accelerated nuclear decay. I'll be debating next Tuesday at 9:30 EST. I'll be debating here live on SFT, David Beldock, Universal Ancestry or Independent Origins. So also, first week of April, we've got Michael Ord back with us. He's going to give a presentation on the Ice Age and the Genesis Flood. Like the one before, it's going to be extensive, a lot of information. Therefore, we're going to have a lengthy audience Q&A following the presentation. That's going to be awesome. And what else comes to mind? We are working on setting up an SFT creation conference, hopefully within the next few months. So guys, we got a lot of great things planned for you. If you want to help us out and support this ministry and support what we're doing, we want to bring as much material to you as possible. Then please consider supporting us, donating to us, or even just sharing around the videos, the information, telling people about us. That's the most important thing, is ultimately reaching as many people with the truth and the gospel as possible. So enough from me. We're going to get right into it. Matt, I see you've got your coffee there as well. Maybe it's not the same coffee I'm drinking, but so let's get right into it, brother. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts on Neanderthals and the critics and their arguments when it comes to Neanderthals? You and I have studied this topic intently. You've had debates on it, discussions on it. I've personally had about 3 formal debates on it. We've written a ton on it in our book. We've got an article on our website about it. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So, yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts? Kick us off, brother.
I think that one of the biggest problems that people have when they start hearing about Neanderthals is they've already, evolution has already taken them and lined them up and said that they're ancient. So people already have that in their mind. That's why they're called Neanderthal and not human. So when you look at the early pictures, you find that they all attributed Neanderthal to looking pretty much like this. And the reason they did this is because of their imagination. And they also knew that the odds of finding hair would be pretty much impossible. So they covered the entire human in hair to make them look more primate, because that's what primates have. They also removed the long hair from the top of their head, because humans grow long hair. And they pretty much were like, well, they're a subhuman class. There's nothing about them that's really human. So that way they were able to kind of storyboard their way around. And we know that today they were completely wrong. And one of the biggest setbacks for them were genetics, right? We found that we mated with them. So how can they be another species? Humans don't speciate. So how do we share so much genetics with Neanderthal? Then we found Denisova, and they also shared genetic DNA with us as well. So the evidence kept getting worse for them. So eventually they just finally said, okay, they look pretty much like us. And if you dressed them up in a suit, they would probably be indistinguishable from us. But they still lived long before we ever did. See how they're still trying to hang on to that last little bit? And the reason that they do this is because of the same reason they talk about primates having a nested hierarchy. And it comes down to genetic differences. You see, Neanderthal, because they were hypermutating, have more mutation differences within them than we do with us. So therefore, they see those differences and say they must be older, just for the exact same reason that they say Africans are older than us, because they look in the Africans and they say, look, more genetic differences, therefore they must be older. They did the same thing with Neanderthal. There's more of them, they must be older. So we're coming along today and we're going to explain to you our perspective from the young Earth creation side.
Right. And I wanted to point out too, great stuff. I've got a couple pictures here on screen, one that you were showing, a depiction as to what they thought Neanderthal looked like in 1856 versus today. And one thing the critics oftentimes don't want to admit, and maybe you can touch on this and give me your thoughts, is the fact that when it comes to Neanderthal, their thoughts in the past have been completely erroneous. Okay. They've had failed prediction after failed prediction when it comes to Neanderthals. They didn't predict the fact that, as your slide was pointing out earlier, the fact that in the last few decades, we've learned that they've buried their dead. They made musical instruments, tools, cosmetics, jewelry, purses. And as you pointed out, most importantly, DNA proves that they were human. I mean, we interbred with them. We literally have Neanderthal genetics. And the point is, they buried their dead, which demonstrates that they had a sense of spirituality, right? And really points to their humanity. You know, they died for shellfish. They had evidence for purposeful navigation, music, made complex tools, right? So now the evolutionists, Matt, and I'm sure you've noticed this, they will admit all this, right? Because the evidence is very powerful. But they don't want to admit that this is a confirmed prediction from biblical creationists pretty well since the discovery of Neanderthals, as compared to the evolutionists, where they have had a drastic revision of the Neanderthals. I mean, look at the difference, 1856 versus now. I mean, 2015, you saw a child like that in real life. I mean, you wouldn't really think anything of it. You know, you wouldn't think anything different. But like you said, yeah, there's the phylogenetic argument, the biodiversity argument. Why are they slightly different than modern humans today? These different things we're going to discuss today. To put it into perspective, though, the bigger picture, we're all 99.99% similar, right, Matt?
Yep.
Well, with the Neanderthals, we are 99.97 or 99.7% similar. I mean, that is very much similar. I mean, 99.7, that's not a huge difference. And considering all the many reasons why there is that slight difference that we're going to get into today, makes complete sense. So I'll hand it over to you, brother.
Sure. I guess we can start with, I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm just too lazy to upload slides, so forgive me. When we started out, we wanted to answer this question for Erica, who said, as in much detail as possible, explain what anatomically constitutes a human and what constitutes an ape in the hominid fossil record, not the species or the criteria. So we came along and made this chart. Okay, this chart was the major focal point, saying, look, there's a lot of criteria. Now, just to remind everybody, the criteria for what makes a person classified in the ape are 5 different things. And this was created a long time ago. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, all we need is 5 criteria different, and we can easily separate human beings from related to apes as well, right? If that's what they use to push us into the family, then we can also use that exact same 5 to move us out. So what I do, I talked about the parabolic jaw, and we get into all of these different things as being different. Erica doesn't seem to focus on anything except for the brow ridges, so which is odd. She focuses actually on 2 things: the chin, which we'll get into, and the eyebrow ridges. So I think her glasses need to be changed, because I actually don't point to eyebrow ridges in this chart. So she kind of created a straw man and then just went on a tirade, because she knew she couldn't address this. So what she did is go, I'm going to just focus on one little thing and then talk about that for 20 hours. And what ended up undermining her entire argument was pretty much this. I said, if Erica were to find these two people in the fossil record, she would classify these as non-human beings. And she came along and says, no, I wouldn't, because they have chins right here. And she goes, you might not be able to see it, but essentially underneath the fatty tissue, you find this, which is the protrusion that comes out right here, which is indicative of modern day human beings. But by saying that, she actually undermined her entire argument. Because if you think about it, the question at topic, the whole reason I created that picture with all the different things that separate us differently was that you can't distinguish a human being in the fossil record. Matter of fact, remember this? This one's for you. Remember when you were in a debate and you showed this as a slide, and the Dan and Erica and everybody in the comment section, you mentioned if you found this guy in the fossil record, he would be deemed an intermediary. And they jumped on and said, no, he has a chin. You can see it right here. We would never classify him as an intermediary or a Neanderthal because of the chin. So they actually forgot that they're undermining their own argument, saying that we can't distinguish a human being in the fossil record by them admitting, of course we can. We just need to look for a chin.
Right.
What? That's what are you talking about?
Right.
You're muted, by the way. And you can't say that we can't distinguish between a human and a primate. And then when I show a picture of a human skull, you can't say, well, yeah, of course that's a human. What? You get what I'm saying?
Well, it's hilarious. You can hear me now, brother?
Yeah.
It's hilarious because I brought that up in a discussion that I had on Speed of Sound's channel as well. It was a discussion against Speed of Sound, Immutable Destiny, and Walker. And I pointed that out, that if you found this skull cap, right, if you found it in isolation, because when it comes to the fossil record, we find a lot of these bones, okay? We find a lot of fossils in isolation. So oftentimes, yeah, they are finding these skull caps, okay, and a lot of other anomalous features in isolation. So without the chin, they're going to come up with all sorts of interpretations, is the point, right? So it's a real lack of listening skills. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Good point, brother.
Thanks. Here's another one as well. Before we hop into it, is I like this because it's a good visual for people to see what we're saying happened. People got off the ark and they migrated around, and we just have extinctions of these weird people or weird features of people, and we're left, and we still have major diversity in skulls today. So finding diversity in different skulls should be expected, but is it indicative of evolution? Because Darwin, remember, he came along and he found this skull right here. This is Neanderthal. And when he found that skull, he said, wait a minute, this is going literally in the wrong direction. Human skulls should be going from small ape-like up. And then all of a sudden we have these primitive skulls, and then all of a sudden we have Neanderthal, right? This massive skull, bigger than our own, with a larger brain, but brain size is indicative to intelligence. So how can we have a human that's got the nose bone ridge, that has a bigger skull, that has the features, the exact same, features as modern day humans, and then all of a sudden we have modern day humans, which are smaller? And it was going in the wrong direction. So he didn't like Neanderthal. He said it was kind of a problem. And they never talked about it again. That's how much of a problem it was. It's kind of like today, they find something out of place, and instead of it being a problem that they brush under the carpet, they actually just name it something. Oh, that's synergistic apostasis. Of course, we expect anomalies. What? Darwinian gradualism expects gradual processes. You don't expect jumps in time. You don't expect stasis. You don't expect all these contradictions, right? So when they found Neanderthal, it was a complete contradiction. So they just said, oh, just brush it under the carpet. But we kept finding them. So they had to eventually say, we got to have an answer to this. So that answer became, they're just a subhuman population. And it's easy to do because of these morphological little bit of different inconsistencies, right? We find the recessive chin, boom, immediately, that's perfect. That's all we need to say these are primitive human beings. But if this is a recessive trait and it comes from inbreeding, and we can find today that the lower facial area of the body is actually one of the most impacted places on the human body when inbreeding is a factor, then we should actually expect an anomaly anywhere in the body to be on your face. And I'm going to prove that to everybody tonight.
Yeah, that's great.
See, I'm always awake at night. I don't even know it's daytime.
Oh, me too. I think we get the most done at nighttime. So this will be fun because we can get a lot of this done at night. And then either in the morning or the early afternoon is when we can do our live with SFT and Raw Matt. So where do you want to take us from here, brother? Where should we we go now?
Sure. Let's talk about something we mentioned this before briefly, but I thought it would be real fun to touch on it, because what we say is it's this. Here is the Earth. Now, if it's flat, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm showing a globe, so this is all we got. Okay, this is Google Earth for you. Okay, so what I have right here highlighted is the first ziggurat that was ever created. It's over here in the Middle East. And this is like by the Tower of Babel area, okay? And we say that the Ark landed anywhere between this region right here, which would be the highest area on Earth, being Mount Everest, and all the way to the mountains of the Mount Ararat, the volcano, which is around this area. So we have this entire region where humans could have gotten off the Ark, and they all congregated till here, right around here, which would have been perfect because if you look at the equator, it would run right around here. And it would have been a good, lush area. And all of this region would have been ice and really bad and uninhabitable. I mean, you could do it. Obviously, they tried, and that's why they went extinct. But what I'm showing you guys is that our model predicts that after Babel, people dispersed. The ones that succeeded went this direction, down into by the equator, right down here into Africa. And the others that succeeded went this direction over to India and down into Australia, right here. Everybody else that decided to go north failed. They completely died. So the same thing didn't just happen with people, but Neanderthal, it happened with mammoth as well. This is a migration pattern of chart that showed mammoth that went over to the Straits and into America and then died as well. And they became isolated, inbred, and extinct, exactly the same as Neanderthal. And look at where they lived, in exactly the same regions as Neanderthal did. And that's not a coincidence, because this is when we said, oh, what did I close? Am I live?
Oh yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I don't know what I just closed. I might have just closed my something I wanted to share. Okay. Back to it. Okay. So we have now what our model was saying is that after the flood, there would have been an ice age from the massive volcanism that was occurring during the flood, when everything came to rest at the end. The mountains formed, and the volcanoes created the ring of fire. And this ring of fire blew up massive amounts of smoke, and it covered the atmosphere and brought down the sheets of ice all the way down near the equator. And this kept everybody in the regions of Australia and Africa for that reason. And then we have the people that tried to migrate out. I should have had the picture around here. Didn't save it. And ended up getting what we know today, which is the inbreeding is finally what brought an end to the Neanderthal, or as I should say, humans. And now we have the evidence, because it's the exact same evidence for the mammoth. And the genetics can't hide it anymore. So we have small populations that were inbreeding, and they kept inbreeding. And what do we tell everybody happens when you inbreed? Well, you get these genetic problems from inbreeding where genes become, or the alleles become homozygous at these gene sites. And then all of a sudden, a specific trait is expressed and it can no longer be weeded out. You can't get rid of it. And you're in big trouble. So here is, let's just save this one for later. I'm sorry. I'll move this over here. Get rid of this. Oh, wait, one more. For Neanderthals inbreeding. So we have plenty of evidence now in genetics to show that inbreeding is probably what brought about their demise. And there's no doubt about this, because when we look at their migration patterns, it's kind of what we see. And then we come over here and we look at the different skulls, right? And I got to remember that I got to enlarge everything for people. This is the Neanderthal today. Red hair, as we found, they have a gene for that. They have the FOXOP2 gene, which is for language. And we find a recessive chin. We don't find that that modern day tip. So why would that be? Well, finally, we have what I'm going to share here. We have some genes for it. But what about inbreeding? Have you guys heard of this family? Hold on, let me enlarge for everybody to see. The Habsburg dynasty were popular for their inbreeding. And they became popular for their jaw. And it was very, very distinct. And you will see right now how distinct it actually was, because it affected here's a study on that, actually, where they actually shown that the jaw was from inbreeding, and it affects mostly the lower third part of the face specifically. And they were homozygous right there, and these recessive traits set in, and there was no possible way for them to really get rid of it unless they married or bred with people outside of the family. And that's one of the biggest problems we have with inbreeding. We have these traits that manifest themselves that become horrible, like an overbite or an underbite where the jaws don't line up. And then you keep getting it passed on. And then that's how they were able to tell these people are inbred, because look, they all carry this characteristic trait of a large jaw, and they all have it. And the only time they would get rid of it is when they would have concubines that weren't related. And here they are on some coins. As you can see, they were a popular family and very wealthy, and their jaw was very protruded. And the same exact thing could have happened in the opposite direction, which we're going to get to. This is called an H positive. And an H negative would have resulted in the recessive. But this is the dominant trait right here. I'll leave this up for people to read as I show some other traits. And we will talk about, here's a great picture. People are pretty good with that Photoshop, I'll tell you. Somebody created this. And we're finding that their jaw became the focal point from the inbreeding above anything else. Their eyes took a little bit of an effect, but not much. It was mostly their jaw that was impacted. So if the jaw is what is the most identifiable and impacted from inbreeding, then we should see it when people that inbreed. And we can. It's obviously this got the recessive trait, right? Look how small their chin and jaw got. Very, very recessive. So if these people were to marry their sister and it would be recessive, all they could ever do is have a weak jaw the entire time. But of course, this doesn't answer the question of how come this exists in modern day people and Neanderthal doesn't. No problem. We're going to get to that right here. Wait, I have some more to share about that family. Here's a great study. Here's the one that was looking at these people about a phenotypic trait, or just traits that are expressed. They're like epigenetics, and anything can be expressed based on region, where you live, what's going on, what's your diet like. And we found mostly that diet affects the shape of the jaw and the structure of the jaw, and whether or not your teeth are going to be impacted. Matter of fact, I want to show this as well. That would be a good time for it, because this also shows that hunter and gatherers don't have a problem with their third molar. It functions properly and perfect in their body, as where here it becomes impacted. Most of us have that, where we have to have our wisdom teeth removed because they either push themselves out, they implode, they break, they grow in sideways. They don't fit in our mouth anymore because of the industrialization. The changing of our foods really messed with us. But other people don't have that problem. So we're finding that chin and jaw structure are highly influenced by what we're doing. And then on top of it, it's also influenced, again, by inbreeding. So you have multiple things that can influence jaw structure, shape, size, what's going on. And we know now that it is inheritable. So once Neanderthal got this recessive curvature and in their jaw, they can never get rid of it. They would have to breed outside. So this is Australian people. Matter of fact, here's a jaw of a Neanderthal here on the left, and as you can see, it doesn't exactly go very far back. So I'm sure they'll say this is an intermediary. This is just a Neanderthal that bred with modern day humans, and that's why it had the jaw. But that's just more evidence to say that they were just humans.
One thing that comes to mind before I forget. In fascinating presentation so far, but what you were showing with the inbreeding, this is all people and families in known recorded human history, as compared to your so-called hominids, like the Neanderthal ancestors, like we're talking about, Floresiensis, Naledi, right, Denisovans, you name it, Erectus. They lived immediately post-flood, where environmental conditions were extremely harsh, right? The harshest that they've ever been, especially during the Ice Age. So that, combined with the immense inbreeding going on in these Neanderthal populations, the fact that they were literally the most inbred people on the planet, right? They've got massive runs of homozygosity. So all of that combined with the harsh environmental conditions and the fact that they were probably founded by an early biblical patriarch, possibly in his old age, and we'll get into that a little bit later, the Neanderthal populations would have started off essentially with more superior genetics, right? Because the Neanderthals we're looking at and the genetics we have that suggests inbreeding, as you were talking about, this was at the end stage of the Neanderthals, right? This is when they're on the verge of extinction. So all of these considered, we would then expect, and correct me if I'm wrong, wouldn't we expect more significant effects due to the inbreeding, because these are populations of people living immediately post-flood, also post-Babel dispersal, as you were talking about. So we can see the horrible effects of inbreeding in these families in known recorded history, right?
Right.
They weren't living in, post-flood or post-Babel Ice Age related conditions. And they were not the most inbred people on the planet like the Neanderthals. So then the Neanderthals, wouldn't we expect even more fixed differences due to the inbreeding, due to the environment? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense, brother?
Oh, of course. And the fact that they even lived longer as well. So now these characteristics can really play a factor because they matter more. Remember, the longer you're going to live, the more these phenotypic traits in your environment are going to matter. And what happened is, we know these people went north, right, up into the cold regions. And your body better acclimate very quickly, because guess what? Not much vitamin D. So therefore, melanin and pigmentation of the skin better really go down, because if you have dark skin and you're up past in the Arctic, you're not going to get what's required. And then you're going to get rickets, and you're going to get other health anomalies. And then your bones are going to start to malform because of some of these things. So that's also going to change structure. Then you have these people that are dispersing. Some are going to go here and some are going to go here. That makes the inbreeding worse, because now these pockets of people that could be possibly marrying cousins, right? And then farther distant cousins and the distant cousins, like all of us did, then you are going to be having less problem with interbreeding. But because of the fact that it was harsh conditions, I'm sure each family that started to branch out said, we got to get out of here. I'm going to leave. And so they go, and where do they end up going? another horrible place, right? They keep going north. They don't have compasses. They don't know that the south is the only place on Earth that's good to go. So what do? They branch off and they go more north or more west. And the problems compound each other. And then you get more inbreeding and more isolation. And then another family branches off. You get more inbreeding, more isolation. But these phenotypic traits have already set in. That's why we keep seeing these recessive traits, right? The larger brow ridges, the recessive chin. Right. None of these are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe a human being has a recessive chin, and I can't believe a human being has a larger brow ridge. You can't say that when we literally have people today with that exact same characteristics. And guess what? They're alive today. So if we have living people today with the same traits, then you can't say that these are anomalies that we should be placing these people as a subhuman population. Right. It's pretty obvious you don't have to. And now we have the evidence to show that the shape of the face is identified to a gene. So if we now know the gene and that is identified for the influence of our face, then we can also find, when we investigate the Denisovan or the Neanderthal, that this gene is homozygous inside of those people groups. And guess what? We do. So when we're finding these jaws that have these phenotypic and genetic traits from inheritance, from inbreeding, and then we find that the evidence lines up to exactly what our story said, when it doesn't have to. It could have been evolution that came out with the evidence, but it's exactly what we've been saying all along. Then it's looking pretty bad for them down the line. And when it's study after study that keeps lining up, and when we're finding people, modern day people, with this very same structure, and we're finding, oh, well, I guess, look at that. It seems to me that different people groups around the world in different regions have different structures to their face, then maybe I shouldn't be lining these up as an evolutionary taxonomic tree of life. Maybe I should just say these are differences in human beings, and all of them should be used as what we can use to identify a human being in the fossil record. And that's what we do, right? We're trying to look and say, hey, what can we use to distinguish and classify a human being? Well, it seems to me we can, and it seems pretty clear we can. And what they're trying to do is saying that these little anatomical differences show that we can't. That's what we call grasping at straws. That's them reaching. That's them. That's their rescue device. They've pretty much run out of ideas at this point and are like, we have to just reach to the little things. Let's complain about this. Let's complain about their height. Maybe we can make some differences from that. But those rescue devices are running out really, really quickly. And I did something for everybody that I think you all like. And what I did is I downloaded the Neanderthal skull that you can see right here, and I made a PNG out of it. And then what I did is I went over and, sorry, wrong one. Maybe here. Yes. Okay. So what I did is this study, as you can see, I hope you can. If not, I'm going to enlarge it. I'm sorry. I don't know what you guys can see. All right. 150 should be good. In this study, what they found an Australian Aboriginal skull, and they were looking at the dentin, they were looking at the teeth, and they were studying it. So you can go to this study and see it yourself. And I downloaded the picture to show you of a Australian Aboriginal modern day human being, and I took the Neanderthal skull, and I'm going to move it over the skull and look for yourself and tell me what you think. Why do they line up so perfectly at all? That should not be the case whatsoever at all. What do you think about that?
It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm still thinking about how you pointed out that they are running out of rescue devices. I feel like they have already run out of rescue devices, but it's not stopping them from circling back to that original rescue device and repeating it, right? Because they've pretty well devolved into talking points. So one thing I wanted to say too, and I don't want to derail from your presentation and your slides, but one thing I wanted to point out when it comes to environment, this was on my mind, in the fact that even the evolutionary community, for one, they had failed expectations, failed predictions, and understandings of what Neanderthal was. Okay, we went over that in the beginning, but the biblical creationists accurately predicted that Homo neanderthalensis is nothing more than a variant of human, right? But we also accurately predicted, according to our model, that they would have survived a cold glacial ecosystem, right? The post-flood ice age. And even the evolutionary community, okay, experts in human evolution, have suggested that a lot of their features are environmentally related to these, harsh, as we were talking about, harsh and cold environments. These environments would have influenced the Neanderthals' physique, because environment, as we know, Matt, influences phenotype a lot more than people ever expected, right? Especially due to epigenetics. So what we see in terms of the Neanderthals being incredibly robust, well-built, well-adapted to these environmental conditions is perfectly consistent with our biblical creation model of post-flood and post-Babel migration and ice age, and even their muscular limbs. I've watched lectures where they talk about how muscular and well adapted they were. They could see the striations in the bones themselves.
Wow.
And and the fact that a lot of their adaptations are known to help generate and retain body heat, and lo and behold, that's it makes sense given the fact that they survived the ice age type ecosystem. So it's funny how the evolutionary community and the critics especially, they want to downplay the fact that they were just so wrong on every level when it comes to the Neanderthals. And then the genetic data comes in, and you think that would just resolve it completely, right? Obviously, they're the same species if we interbred with them.
Right.
And we have their genetics, and they were shocked and did not predict that. So anyways, I could rant forever. So go ahead, brother. I just wanted to point that out.
No, it's true. It's so true. They didn't expect it. And that's what's funny, is because they're the ones trying to make all the predictions. And I've said it in the past that we have a different example of why there would be these genetic differences going on if we all came out of the bottleneck at the same time. And that was the study that I just released and put up. And to give everybody just a real quick example of that, like, if this is the genetic bottleneck of Noah's flood that reset all of life, then what's going on? Like, if these are all cats, right, and these are genetic clocks, then how come they're ticking at different rates? Because in evolution, remember, the neutral theory predicts that the mitochondria clocks will be identical. And that's why they assume that this one is older, this pongo or orangutan is older than the gorilla, which is older than the chimpanzee and human. Because they believe that because of the mutation differences are higher in the pongo orangutan and then the gorilla, but the gorilla is higher than both the chimpanzee and human, then therefore this is an example of evolution. And that's why they had to invent the primate slowdown hypothesis, because they realized, wait a minute, if everything went through a bottleneck at the same time, and these have more mutations than these, and these have more mutations than these, then what's going on here? If genetic diversity all popped through a global flood bottleneck, then how do we as creationists explain this right here? Well, we say there's a lot of reasons, really. There's major factors. One is called the longevity hypothesis. The other one's called the metabolic rate hypothesis. And then there's the A generation time hypothesis. There's a lot of different ones. But if we just look at generation time, which is what Dr. Jensen predicted would make Africans mutate faster or twice as fast as Europeans, then why in the world would we not assume that maybe the same aspect might apply? So what do we look at when we see orangutans? Well, they have a generation time of around 11 years. So therefore, they would have much more mutations than a gorilla at a generation of 20 years. And the gorilla would have more than, as you can see, humans and chimpanzees, which is exactly what we see. We're seeing a mutation rate that is based on generation time because there's been more generations. How many generations would exist in an orangutan species that came out of an ark that has one of 11 years? Well, more than 3 times the amount of a human at a rate 30 years average generation time. So they would look 3 times older. It's exactly what we would expect to see if the biblical bottleneck was true, and it is exactly what we do see. And it explains that why their neutral theory is wrong. And we can make predictions on ours, and that's what I did. And we can see that the same thing lines up with Neanderthal. We're not seeing Neanderthal here as a different subclass of people that were a long time ago, and they lived for hundreds of thousands of years. I think they say 400 to 600,000 years because of how many genetic differences they had. The differences were from hypermutation, and we say these small populations caused that. And they were, like you said, they were living in these really harsh conditions, and they didn't have a chance to go out and marry somebody else. They just kept eating whatever they could find. And what do we find? They did eat whatever they could find, right? I mean, they were eating anything. They ate primates. They were hunting mammoth. They were eating grass. You got to be hungry if you're hunting dire wolf and grass. That's crazy. You're hunting things that can kill you and that are hard to kill, and eating grass. I mean, you're starving to death. And that's what we see. And these features, these phenotypic anomalies are just that. They're anomalies because they were living in places that didn't have the sun, that had harsh conditions. They were inbreeding, and the evolutionists can come along and they see these little anomalies and they can spin the story as much as SpongeBob can. And that's what they do with it. They aren't willing to accept that, well, I guess a human could have a recessive chin if they were inbreeding, because they look at inbreeding today and they can see that the jaw is totally affected by inbreeding, and they'll just say, who cares? Who cares? That's exactly the evidence that you would want if you were logical and would actually be open-minded to what we're actually saying. But the fact that they're so unwilling to accept any type of an answer and just go right back to the Google for their answers, evolutionary answer to Denisovan. Okay, I'll read that off tonight. Then that just shows you right there that they don't care what the model of ours actually says, because they have consensus, right? They have the mass majority of opinion on their side, and that's what they use, because they just think that we're some fringe group of people on the side that doesn't have any science, and they can just go, oh, well, they're quacks. They're like flat earth and Bigfooters. We can ignore them because they'll never become anything. So that's all they have is an argument, and they side with the vast majority of YouTube atheists, and they go, they must be right. Like, can you believe they literally said that I lost that debate against Nick Souter in the comment section on Modern Day Debate when Nick actually said I give up after about 1 hour. How do I lose a debate when my opponent says he gave up? That just shows you how biased they are.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he realized after your opening statement, and especially your rebuttal to all of his very familiar talking points, I think he quickly realized, okay, maybe I should not have taken this debate. And what's funny is this, okay, given everything we know and how empirical it is, okay, we've got paper upon paper, source upon source, confirming all of this about the Neanderthal, okay, confirming, for one, that there was a ton of inbreeding. This was population wide, okay, a shocking amount of inbreeding. As I pointed out earlier, when you look at their runs of homozygosity, they've got extremely high levels of homozygosity, okay? These, Dr. Rob Carter was pointing out in our interview with him that they've got these massive, massive stretches of identical letters in their genome, right? But I want to point out that regardless of all of this data, okay, once again, not predicted by the evolutionists, your critics, okay, like Dodgeball Dan, for example, they'll look to the phylogenetic issue, okay, because they don't want to tap out. But the point is, okay, the Neanderthal is being highly inbred. The fact from our model and starting position, okay, they would have already been different, right, Matt? Because they were an early branch of man. So they would have started off different. The early Neanderthal would have been more genetically superior, right? Because when it comes to the genetic data, we're looking at the end stage of the Neanderthal when they were extremely inbred, when they've accumulated massive, massive numbers of mutations. They're on their way to extinction at that point, right? So the fact that early man would have been more diverse, they would have been different. And also, and we can have you touch on this in a minute if you want, the reality of patriarchal drive. If these early biblical patriarchs were living longer, then obviously they're going to pass on more mutations. So the founder of the Neanderthals, for example, if they were founded by an early biblical patriarch in his old age, well, then the Neanderthals would have picked up a ton of mutations right off the bat. For the fact that man would have at least lived longer in the immediate post-flood world, okay? So right away, Matt, they already possessed a different set of biodiversity, okay? And when you've got all these people groups going different, migrating to different parts of the earth, let's say post-Babel, and also, for example, the Neanderthals, they could have broken off of the human population before Babel, which would have given them more time to acquire these fixed differences in terms of genetics and in terms of phenotype, right? All of these things considered, okay, you got these different people groups going to different parts of the world. You've got the hobbits, right? Floresiensis. You've got Naledi, Denisovans, Erectus. Okay, you've got Luzonensis, Neanderthals. They're all experiencing what? Different environmental conditions, and all harsh. Okay, so that means they've all got different histories. They've experienced essentially different levels of inbreeding. A lot of them became isolated on islands like the hobbits, Floresiensis, like Naledi, like Luzonensis. So therefore, they experienced island dwarfism. All different situations. Therefore, no one size fits all. It explains why they all fit neatly in the human category, the human type, but with these fixed differences. So what they'll say is the phylogenetics is an issue. No, all of these things considered, and they don't want to admit it, and that's okay because everybody already knows they've lost, and they know that they've lost deep down inside. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. All of these things considered, okay, gives us exactly the same type of phylogenetic tree that we see, where the critics, like Dodgeball Dan, want to say, hey, this makes Homo neanderthalensis a sister group, which means they could not have ultimately descended from Adam and Eve. No, they just don't want to tap out. All of these things considered, okay, whether they like it or not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, give me your thoughts and I'll yield here, gives us exactly the type of tree, phylogenetically speaking, that we see, that the evolutionists want to point to as a contradiction to young Earth creation. What are your thoughts?
Well, they want to say everything is a contradiction to us because they're not willing to, look at it from our perspective. And that's pretty much indicative of the fact that every time you've had a debate, you ask your opponent, can you reiterate what my position is? And they never can. But regardless, they want to nitpick over like little tiny things at this point. You notice how the flood has basically come down to, okay, we really can't refute anything except for the heat problem. So therefore the flood can't be true. They're literally down to like one argument.
Yeah.
You'll find that across the board with a lot of different models that we have. I would love to see what their explanation for the patriarchal drive is. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's basically, I'll open up a thing for you. Ooh, thought it would be right there. I was wrong. Okay. So right here are the patriarchs. Can you see that, by the way? I'll just assume you can. So basically, these are the patriarchs that lived before.
I gave you the thumbs up, brother. We're good. We're good.
Oh, sorry,
I can't see it. Go ahead.
So these are the patriarchs that lived before the flood, and this is Noah. And then the flood hit, and we see a drastic drop off right here in the age and the life expectancy. And Dr. John Sanford and Dr. Robert Carter came along and they ran the numbers to see like what's going on. And John Sanford recognized this immediately as what's called a biological decay curve. And he found that if people went through a massive bottleneck, and somebody like Noah would have been actually living to 500 when he had his children, he would have dumped a massive amount of deleterious mutations and de novo mutations into the offspring. And if that were the case, they would be affected by a biological decay curve. And that's what they found. And that's the amazing thing about patriarchal drive. Now, that would have affected the Neanderthal probably the most, because if these people were to get off the ark, and this is a lineage from Noah's descendants, and they were just impacted by massive amounts of these mutations, and then they go off on their own with just a small family, they're obviously going to have massive amounts of problems. And then those small groups of people branch off. Now they've just compounded those problems, because now you have a smaller group of people that are inbred, that are more homozygous. You're never going to pull away.
Matt,
you know. Sorry, what?
And what happens when it's a small population that's highly inbred, okay, and maybe right off the bat, followed by exponential population growth? What happens when it comes to these fixed differences? When it comes to fixed mutations, right? They get fixed more rapidly in a small population.
Yep. Yeah. They stay there. They stay there for good. And we know the Denisovan, they inbred as well. They're just another people group. And then look at this. We have here a Neanderthal that mated with somebody that didn't have the recessive trait of the chin. And look, we can see that they have the typical modern day human chin, but the Neanderthal skull size, the forehead, and the brow ridges with the nose bone. So we see a combination of modern and what they call primitive. Now, why would that be if they're saying that no, the chin is something that's a separate issue altogether? But we see that the chin being a recessive trait genetically, but when it moved outside of the family of inbreeding into a Cro-Magnon, that they got this. Interesting, isn't it? So maybe it does go to show you that you can get out of it if you stop inbreeding. So we see all the typical traits of inbreeding from the fossil record, and it's not evidence for evolution. Done.
Amazing. And I want to, I'm going to share screen something, okay, just to demonstrate that PhDs who were well studied in this understand that the type of phylogenetic tree that we see, okay, that the critics want to say is a contradiction that we can't explain, have been examined, okay? And let me just share screen real quick. Now I've got, actually, you know what? I've got all of this stuff documented in our books too. So this one's Special Creation, entire chapter on Neanderthals, addressing the phylogenetics issue, right? Especially because, you and I, Matt, we love to take their so-called best objections, okay, their best rebuttals, and we love to just absolutely demolish them, right? Leave no stone unturned. And then you've got your mutation rate book up there as well, which pretty much goes through in depth a lot of these mutation rate studies that confirm a young Eve, a young Adam, but then they want to look to the Neanderthal biodiversity and say that that's a contradiction to it. Well, so anybody new to the channel, we've got a ton of material, ton of books, articles on this topic, but let me share screen real quick. And here we go. Okay. So right here, okay, we document patriarchal drive intensely in our work. I've brought it up in debates numerous times with Walking Fish, with David recently in Neanderthals, and they don't have a good argument. No good argument at all. Okay, so I'm going to read this here. Okay. In the end, we expect a chaotic early history of man. Of course, right, Matt? Immediately post-flood. And what happens, Matt? Actually, touch on this because you're the health guy. What happens when you have a post-flood people group? Okay, you have people who are essentially coming out of what? A near perfect world, the pre-flood world, right?
Yeah.
So they've got more superior genetics, which would reflect the phenotype as well, of course. Okay, and now they are entering a new world of harsher conditions. The entire real estate of the earth has been rearranged. Okay, so what happens now to these people who are accustomed, I guess you could say, to the old, more superior world, and they're now dumped into this more harsh world? Okay, so you've got Neanderthals, which started off as an early branch of man, more superior. What happens? Are they not going to go downhill a lot quicker now? I mean, are their genetics, are they used to these harsher conditions? It would be like you, right? It would be like you, who probably haven't had McDonald's in how long? Okay. You know, your body is very alkaline versus acidic because of the way you eat and what you choose to put in your body, right? But if you just went on this McDonald's spree, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next 6 months, that's all you consume, McDonald's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what would happen? Would you not descend into unhealthiness pretty quick?
Oh, they made a movie on that. It's called Super Size Me.
Yeah.
Guy.
and what happened?
He barely made it a month. The doctor was telling him, you better stop. You're getting really, really bad. Now, we're not saying that Neanderthal had McDonald's. We're saying we're saying that these superior genetically people got off. Neanderthal had more genes than we do. So if they had more genes, they could have had more diversity. They had better things going on. They had the potential to adapt and acclimate better than we do today. And then all of a sudden, they get off a boat and they have children, and now these children are living in a world with less oxygen, with an atmosphere that's been blocked off from the sun in most regions of the world, especially where these people were, and they're not getting much vitamin D, and they are now have iridium to breathe in if they stayed in these volcanic regions where the sun is blocked out, which Neanderthal did. Well, iridium, right, is a carcinogen, right? So now they're dealing with breathing in a carcinogen, lowering their life, and then they're barbecuing their food because fire keeps them warm. As we're down in the tropics, you're walking around eating fruit, you're doing good. And now all of a sudden they're killing mammoth and wolves and primates and maybe even each other, I don't know. And they're barbecuing up all these foods. Well, that's a known carcinogen. That's caused what's known as advanced glycotic end products and glycation, and that's aging you. And then your somatic mutations spike. Now you're living in a cave to stay warm, and there's smoke in your cave. There's more somatic mutations. That's horrible for your lungs. And then there's a plethora of all these different things that are causing all more somatic mutations to rise in the body that wouldn't be affecting people in other regions. And then you're inbreeding. So now you're compounding de novo mutations on top of somatic mutations. So you've got this massive bombardment from diet, from environment, from inbreeding. You're just it's a recipe for disaster, even for people that had much superior genetics.
Boom. Because a lot of people will say too that, hey, you know, you are looking to some of these early post-flood people groups, let's say Neanderthal, as having superior genetics, having evidence for longevity. But then we see in their genetics, right, the end stage Neanderthal, we see that they're on their way to extinction. They've accumulated a lot of homozygosity. They've accumulated a lot of deleterious mutations. Yeah, that's the end stage of the Neanderthal, which is exactly what we'd expect. I mean, boom, you just killed it right there. It would be rapid devolution at the same time as they're adapting to the cold ecosystems of the ice age, and then they're inbreeding at the same time. I mean, they have a history, okay, like no other people group. And that's why these critics, okay, like somebody like Dodgeball Dan, right? He's got such a hyper focus because he's not very versatile, okay? And you focus on his one or two main talking points and you demolish them with sound evidence, right? And because critics such as that, they don't really have much else. They have to hold on to those talking points, even though those talking points have been dealt with over and over again. So for example, here, so as we just discussed, we expect a chaotic early history of man. You nailed it there, Matt. You nailed it, brother. And right here, the combination, okay? The combination of rapid early population growth, right? Patriarchal drive, fragmentation of the population after Babel, okay? With the subsequent long-term isolation of some groups that we've been discussing. You're going to get these fixed differences in genetics, fixed differences in phenotype. And Matt, as you're pointing out, there'd be a lot of genes lost over time. Neanderthals go extinct. Okay, your main line of humans continue on for thousands of years later. Are we that surprised that we've got some different sets of biodiversity? Anyways, we'll keep going. Extreme inbreeding in some, right? Your Neanderthals. Population surges and collapses and selective sweeps. Okay, and I like how he points out either naturally or through war and conquest creates what? A perfect recipe. Right, Matt? A perfect recipe for exactly the type of tree that we see. Now, I like how he points out that specific tree cannot necessarily be predicted. Why? Because of that extremely chaotic early history of man. But we look at the empirical data today, okay, that suggests that Neanderthals picked up a lot of mutations over time. They lived in very harsh conditions. Lack of vitamin D, for example, can result in possibly the mutations to essential DNA repair enzymes, which would lead to more mutations over time. Okay. Patriarchal drive, long-term isolation, selective sweep, all of these things, okay, considered, gives us exactly the tree that we see. Exactly the tree that these desperate critics, okay, want to point to as being their best argument, even though it's been completely demolished, completely dealt with. They want to ignore the fact that everything about Neanderthal they did not predict. What are your thoughts about them clinging on to these arguments that have been so thoroughly dealt with? And maybe you want to add something to that, brother. I yield. Go ahead.
I don't really think they're considering, from our perspective, that modern people, the most people groups on the world back then, were migrating. They were dispersing. There was an expansion going on. And this doesn't allow mutations to reach fixation quickly at all. It's why we have so few. But in small groups, these mutations that are flipping over and especially fast from inbreeding, they're going to reach fixation quick because the population's small. We're talking a couple handfuls of people in groups today, right? It's causing the diversity to look like there's more in them because you're getting this massive amounts of fixation that keeps rising in these groups of people. And there's another thing too, is remember, Neanderthal were right after the flood. What do we have as far as evidence goes in scripture anyway, that talks about the age? Well, they lived for a long time. We know the longer you live, the more mutations you pass on. So if you're a 400-year-old person, you're going to pass on a lot of mutations. And Noah's grandkids did live a long time. It wasn't until the 10th through the 15th generation when people were finally living to about 100 to 200 years old in this small range, right? So that decay curve happened fairly quickly. So right after the flood, you've got people that live a very long time and are passing on yet again more mutations than normal. And we know this is true as well from the fact that one thing is true. We can look at identical twins today, and identical twins move to different regions of the world and have children. And these identical twins with identical genomes will pass on different amounts of mutations to their children. And they'll also have different amounts of somatic mutations built up in their own body based on what they do. If one is a smoker and a drinker and eats bad food, they're going to have far more mutations in their body than their identical twin born at the same time than they do. So we know that mutation load is different based on the fact that we can see it. So it's not some type of a mystery anymore. We don't have to just assume that Neanderthal was different. We can actually know that they're different by looking at what we observe today, and that's what we see. So,
well, let me ask you this, and great points. These critics, okay, they still don't understand the significance of the FOXP2 gene, okay, because they have been discussing that, I don't know what standing for truth or Raw Matt mean, and I brought this up in a debate with no answer from my interlocutor, so I think they got to pretend I think they got to play stupid, play dumb, right? But the significance of the FOXP2 gene showing that Neanderthalensis was in every way human because they had those requirements for complex language and speech, as compared to the FOXP2 that we would be looking at in chimpanzees and some of the great apes. Okay, they don't understand the significance of that. Matt, can you touch on that a little bit, brother?
Yeah, the gene does actually quite a few things, but the FOXP2 gene is indicative for language. So, but here's the thing. You need two of them. You need two of these genes that are functioning to be able to actually process and actually have language. And when we look and we find primates and we look inside their body, we only find one of these genes. And they actually did a study and they were like, well, let's cause a gene duplication that's active and then see what happens with the primates. See if they come up with some more language. See if we're able to teach them more sign language, see if they're able to actually do anything. And nothing happened whatsoever. So they were like, interesting. Obviously, they wanted their grant money, so they didn't say this was a failure, but that's what it was. And then we look inside of Denisovan and Neanderthal and modern human. What do we find? Two of these genes in all of us, every one of us. And they were active genes. They weren't just like, oh, they're randomly placed and one was horribly mutated or one was maybe non-functional. We look and then we found both of them in Neanderthal. That's exactly what we find in us. So to say that they didn't speak when they don't have any anatomical soft tissue, it's their storyboard. It's like, well, they didn't find long hair on them, so obviously they were primates. They didn't find human skin, so obviously they were covered in fur. It's the paradigm driving the conclusion. They're starting with evolution being true, and then they're building the story around it. We're just like, look at the evidence, what we do have, and the evidence is pretty clear. It lines up exactly with what we would expect. And then they come along and they go, well, yeah, they might have had those two, but that's just proof that the common ancestor had one and the chimp probably lost it. You see what I mean? Just like assumption.
Such a small difference, a couple small differences like you're pointing out. Okay. When we look at, say, the chimpanzee, and yet we, alongside the Neanderthals, had highly complex language and speech abilities. So even those couple differences, the question is, can those result? And has that ever resulted in or been observed to evolve such complex language skills? You know what I mean? And you get what I'm saying? Because the evolutionists would have to say, okay, this was lost, or a couple simple changes can result in massive functional differences in terms of speech and language, right?
Right. They have to assume that one gene is the powerhouse as well, right? They're going, man, this difference in humans and chimpanzees, it's just subtle, but that's all that needs to happen is subtle changes, right? Because that's what Darwinian gradualism is. It's little subtle changes that have a profound effect. So they can invoke that, but again, they also said that primates speak language. They don't have grammar. Matter of fact, they even tried to say that what was that one that had sign language? That they know how to speak. They do sign language. It's like, no, they know basic nouns. They know like words. Like they'll show a picture and it'll have a bird in water and it'll go bird, water. You know what I mean? It'll sign what it sees. It's not having a language. It's not having a conversation with you. They don't do that. We're the only ones even remotely close that do that. So they're trying to say that Neanderthal was using the grunting of the language, right? That they didn't have full functioning larynxes and things like that. So they weren't quite sure. They were probably signing and grunting sounds from animals. It's called the bow wow theory, and that's what eventually caused humans to finally be able to speak language. Is the fact that they grunted it into existence because of that. And nothing could be further from the truth. We have evidence of them being able to speak. We have them, like, we found cave drawing, we found instruments, we found pendants that they made, and they were doing everything a human would be able to do. I mean, if they could build a ship to sail, you know what I mean? I don't know why they're saying that they're brainless.
Purposeful navigation suggests sophistication and intelligence. So right here, I want to point this out too, Matt. You know, what are your thoughts on this? Because there has been some analyses done in terms of baraminology, okay, where they're looking at archaic and modern human genomes. And what they've discovered was the genomes of modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans are very similar to each other. Besides this general similarity, right, genome size, number of proteins, ACGT percentage, chromosome number, okay, they also have a similar high scoring motive content. Since some genomic regions are present in the genomes of archaic humans, right, which the critics want to point to, but missing in modern humans, what does this show? It shows that the human genome, the baranome, okay, is devolving and not evolving. As you pointed out, right? Neanderthal populations would have started off different sets of biodiversity, more superior. These harsh conditions, the inbreeding would result in what? A lot of genes being lost, a lot of functions being damaged. So is there any reason for us to really be confused as to why modern human genomes and some archaic genomes are different? I mean, this is what they're discovering, brother, you know?
Oh, I know. I like that baraminology. It's amazing because it's they finally have a way, basically, for the audience that are listening, they've taken the subtle differences that we find in species and in animals and in things that are related and in things that might not be. They're not sure. And they classify them. They put them together and they say, okay, how large is their spinal column? How many vertebrae does it have? How many ribs? How big is their rib cage? You know, what is their density? You program in all of these different features. Obviously, some things are very, very simple, like I would even say a human. Well, how many bones do we have? You know, just a few hundred. So it's very easy. You type all these in and you put them into an analog and you run the numbers. And this is what we see. This is right here is what they've been showing is they were looking at the different dinosaurs and they were going, well, let's see which one are related and which one aren't. And they were able to find that some things that they actually thought might have not been actually are. So this is what's really unique is they'll run the system, they'll program it in, and then they'll look at a chart and they'll see, like, this might be hard for you guys to see, but you can see the little gray dots. These are some of the same species. And then you'll find another box over here, and that is a totally separate kind, even though they were classified as probably the same species. So it's delineating taxonomic levels. It's showing what is a created kind. So when the numbers were actually run on primates, it's fascinating because look, you couldn't ask for more of a clear grouping of what we would expect to see. Homo erectus, Neanderthal, Homo sapiens, all nest perfectly, exactly what we would expect to see if we were related, just like the chimpanzees do. But the chimpanzees aren't related to the Western gorilla or the other gorillas. And it's based on inputting all of the different data, not genetic data. That's what's unique about this. This is physical, anatomical differences that we can see. We're literally looking at what we find in the fossil record, and we're able to go, okay, let's line these up. Let's see if these species really are related to one another based on the anatomical features. Is a midget that's alive today a dwarf related to a modern human? Well, in a fossil record, you would look at that and you'd be like, I don't know. The dwarf is really odd looking. He's kind of an out group. Maybe it's a gnome or some halfling or some kind of weird creature that doesn't even belong in the human tree. Let's test it. Boom, you type in, you do all the input you possibly can, and it pops out of the chart like, oh, that's a nested group. They're all together, and it's based on anatomical features. So it's great. Now we have genetic evidence and physical differences. And so it saves me a lot of work because I don't know about the fossil record. That's not my specialty. I don't spend much time there because it's low confidence science to me. That's how I consider it. Too many stories can be told. But now we have a way to put these things into a program and let the computer do it. And math isn't wrong. So it lines these things up. And if there's too many discrepancies, it places that into a different taxonomic group. And now you know it's not of the same created kind. So baraminology is amazing. I'm super fascinated by it.
Well, and I love how, for example, recently we had Dr. Matthew McLean on, because you've got evolutionists like James Downard who deserve a spot essentially in the bench warmer and the water boy category as Dapper Dino, right? I mean, they have very little to offer, and this strong focus on low quality science, low confident science doesn't really add much to the discussion, right? And that's where we can at least give credit where credit is due to people like Dr. Dan Stern Cardinale, where they at least focus on the direct evidence, right? Genetics is what essentially determines ancestry. That's best where we can answer this question. Well, you got the bench warmers of Team Dodgeball, right? Like, I mean, someone like Dapper Dino, he might even be fired from bench warming and water boy soon. He's so bad. So, credit where credit is due. Now, that being said, people like Dodgeball Dan, they still fail in their genetics argument, but at least they know where to focus, right? And then that's where we can go to the most important areas and show why those direct lines of evidence confirm independent origins, biblical creation. So, Dr. McLean has come on and he has shown clear barriers and discontinuities in your synapsids, right? Your mammal-like reptiles. And somebody like James Downard, where it's like the only thing he wants to focus on, he's written a book on it. He's been completely demolished and destroyed, and he's yet to address it. Explain these barriers, these discontinuities, okay? Using these analyses and focusing on these certain traits and stuff. So it's just amazing that the fossil record data and the genetic data confirms independent origin. So great stuff. We are going on. Hey, this has been great to the Godzilla freak. Exactly. It's pretty bad when their best still essentially fails, right? So what does that say about your bench warmers and your water boys who have nothing to offer? It's funny. So also, I want to point out to the audience, guys, we are going to re-upload these as well to our other channel, which used to be titled Raw Matt. It's now titled Young Earth Creation. We're going to re-upload there. We just hit 7,000 subscribers. How many views on that flood video, Matt?
Oh man, I think I'm coming up to like 450,000.
450,000. So, that one video has more views than all of your bench warmers of Team Dodgeball combined, channel-wise. So they may want to, rethink their approach to this, because it's not looking good for Team Evolution. So we're going to re-upload to that channel. Subscribe there if you haven't yet subscribed. And we are going to be doing a lot of these, okay, because we've gone for an hour and a half. And we've had almost 40 people roughly the entire time. So we're going to focus on a large number of topics. If it's quick, we're going to wind it down, guys, because I got to get upstairs to dinner. I can hear the kids. Matt's got some things to do as well. We got some more work to do. So shoot us your question, my good man. We'll have Matt answer it real quick. And then we're going to call it a night. Make sure you're here tomorrow for John McKay and Dr. Diane Eager, they're going to be here for a Q&A presentation on fossils and the flood, so on and so forth. So, yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts on that, brother? He earned that golden dodgeball. That's for sure. So yeah, if Xiaomi had a quick question, then
yep.
But
hopefully it goes through.
Yeah. So guys, definitely yeah, we're gonna be doing more of these, lots of shows to come. We're working on setting up and arranging and hosting an SFT creation conference, hopefully by summer. So help us out, support us. We want to keep putting out daily content, putting on all the best interviews. So I appreciate it, Cole, the kind words. And guys, what we'll do is thank you so much, Jeremy, for the super chat. I appreciate it, brother. Mitchell, thanks so much for the support. You guys are the life and blood of this channel. So you guys are what's keeping this going full time, and we want to keep doing this full time. So you guys are going to see a lot more of Matt. Matt's back in action. We're going to be doing these podcasts frequently. So Matt, it looks like the question came up, brother. If you want to answer it real quick.
Oh, okay.
And that'll put us.
I didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, he's always been here. Me and Matt are talking probably 95% of the day, aren't we?
Yeah.
Brainstorming, coming up with stuff, having fun. So here's the question. Oh,
I closed it.
And then we'll call it a day.
Okay. A drop unless sun and Neanderthal skin tone. Were you saying that it would have to be fast? But does the same apply to Eskimo? Remember, Eskimos themselves are Asian descent, and they came over from Asia, and they had normally darker skin. And then remember, the Eskimos stayed there, and they kept migrating, and they came down into America, and they became Native Americans, which have darker skin. So you got to remember, there's like 378 genetic loci, like locations, basically, where skin color is governed and controlled. So it's not just one gene. There are two major genes that do control skin color, but there's a lot of different genes that do as well. So skin color is mitigated and controlled mostly by phenotypic traits, right? It's based on where you live. So only through recombination can you really get like some problems. So for example, two black people can only really have a black child through recombination. The only way it couldn't have would be through mutation. And that's where evolution comes along. They're saying that it takes a long time because mutation takes a long time. We're saying things happen faster through recombination. So that's what we're seeing when we see indicative skin color changes happening rapidly. Eskimos aren't like a million-year-old people group, right? They're just a couple of thousand years ago at most. So we're talking about people that migrated over the Bering Strait into America and down, and some stayed in Canada, and others in, just around the region, and others went into North America and became Native American Indians, and their skin color just changed based on where they were because of the gene locations.
Awesome. Great answer, brother. You are an encyclopedia of information. So I'm glad we're on the same side, because I wouldn't want to have to take you on. Or I'd probably have to resort to the pathetic arguments that are coming out of the bench warmers like Dapper Dino. So anyways, guys, I hope you guys had fun. Thanks so much, everybody in the chat. Good to see everybody. We've kept a good audience. Boom. We just hit the hour-and-a-half mark. And lots to look forward to. We're going to be doing this at least once a week, live with SFT and Raw Matt. We've got a number of topics. We can do this for the next million years. Okay. We could do this until the next big step in evolution.
Yeah.
Raccoons evolved into humans. So, guys, pass this information around. It's a great time to be a young Earth creationist, because as everybody has seen, the evolutionists don't have much to offer. So it started off laughable. It turned into kind of sad, and now it's just sad and laughable at the same time. So last words, Matt.
No, I just saw Cole saying, does gene location mean they bred with other people? Genetic location are where alleles line up. So if you have a parent with two different heterozygous alleles, then if the other parent does as well, you have heterozygosity. But if they have the both identical, like the Neanderthal would have from inbreeding, they're homozygous. So you don't get a lot of diversity. So Neanderthal, because they were inbreeding, they would have only had whatever phenotypic traits they had adapted to in that region. So if they were pale with freckles and had white skin, they would have been forced to retain and maintain that because of the homozygosity at those gene sites. So they would have never been able to move to Africa later and evolved black skin because of the inbreeding.
All right, guys. Well, God bless everybody. I'm going upstairs to eat. Matt, you go eat as well. You've earned it, brother. Great show. Great presentation. And Film Free says, hold on, guys. I feel it coming. Woo! Done evolving. I'm okay for now.
Done.
That'll boy. That's proof right there. All right, guys. God bless. SFT and Raw Matt are out.